Hello, everyone. I'm Zwade Kaufman, publisher of Truth Dig. If you're new to us, we're an independent, reader-supported news site committed to digging beneath the headlines. We're glad to have you here, and we hope you'll visit our site. Today, we are delighted to have Lillian Perlmutter as our moderator for this event, Border Future, an exploration of what's next for the U.S. Mexico frontier. Lillian is an independent journalist based in Mexico City and the curator of our Dig series At the Border in 2024. Her extensive work has been featured in numerous outlets, including Truth Dig, The Guardian, the Los Angeles Times, and Foreign Policy magazine. In this discussion, we will delve into what the borderlands might look like in the coming years through the perspectives of migrants, Border Patrol officers, residents of border towns, and individuals involved in organized crime. We'll cover the use of laws, weaponry, drones, AI, and more that prevent vulnerable people from reaching the United States. Lillian's ongoing contributions to Truth Dig continue to be not just timely, but critical as U.S. border policy raises serious questions about Washington's commitment to human rights and the internationally recognized right to asylum. And now, to introduce and welcome our panel of experts. Luis Chaparro is an independent journalist with over a decade of experience covering organized crime, narco-trafficking, and corruption in the borderlands. His stories have been featured in Vice News and Al Jazeera. Luis helps us to understand what happens when migrants encounter the world of organized crime as they get closer to the border itself. You can read more of his work on his Substack, Saga. Welcome, Luis. Our next panelist.
Thank you very much, and thanks.
Welcome. Our next panelist, Jen Budd, is the author of the memoir, Against the Wall, My Journey from Border Patrol Agent to Immigrant Rights Activist. Based on her experiences, Jen provides us with a glimpse into the underworld of policing at the border, as well as what Border Patrol might look like in the coming years, as the situation at the border shows no signs of cooling down. Welcome, Jen. Todd Miller is an author and researcher whose work explores border surveillance and the symbolism of the wall. Todd will discuss how technology and border externalization are transforming the way the border functions. He is the author of several books, including his latest, Build Bridges, Not Walls, A Journey to a World Without Borders. Welcome, Todd. We also extend a warm welcome to everyone joining us today. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat. We've set aside time for a Q&A. Again, thank you for joining our event today. I'll now hand it over to you, Lillian.
Thank you, Zwade. Okay, let's get started. Thank you to all of you for being here. I'm a great admirer of all of your work, and I'm excited to kind of open up some of the big questions at the border with all of you. My first question is, what are some growing long-term trends that we're seeing in the border in terms of the migrants themselves, in terms of the policing of their movement, as well as just the nature of the borderlands that are sort of growing, glimmering right now that the public is likely not very aware of? And maybe we'll start with Todd and then just go around.
Sure. Thank you, Lillian. It's great to be here. It's an honor, really. And I mean, there's so many trends, I don't know where to start, but the one that really speaks to me to mention first and foremost is budgets, right? The budget for border and immigration enforcement, for example. If you were to take CBP and ICE and just combine their two budgets together, when you hear, like some of the rhetoric around quote unquote open borders and stuff like that you hear quite a bit, being accusations of that, it's hard to put those things together when you look at a budget this year for the CBP and ICE of about $30 billion. If you combine CBP and ICE, and the trend, like if you go back, like say I like to go back to 1994 because that's when you have a deterrence strategy. The prevention through deterrence strategy was implemented in 1994. The border and immigration enforcement budget was $1.5 billion under the Immigration and Naturalization Service. And that has incrementally increased over 3 decades, like 30 years, very much accelerated in the post 9/11 era. It has meant, bigger, more border, more personnel, border patrol, ICE officers, all the different agents that comprise CBP or ICE. It has meant massive amounts of technologies increasing every year. It has meant, more and more border wall and barriers, among other things. So that's probably where I would start with that question.
Yeah, I don't know if, Jen, you have any thoughts about what that might mean for sort of the mission of border enforcement or border patrol in general, and how that increased budget might be changing the way that border patrol is acting.
It's changed it quite a bit. I mean, the border patrol is nothing like what it was when I was an agent, and in fact, since the after 9/11, when former Chief David Aguilar stated he didn't want the United States Border Patrol to really be on the border that much anymore. And so what we've seen on the southern border is the preparation that the rest of the country is going to see. So in Texas and in Arizona, New Mexico specifically, a little bit in California, though there's a lot of resistance to it, we see where we have peace officers, so your local sheriffs and police departments and your state troopers are now immigration agents. And they are now pulling people over. They now claim they can pull people over based on reasonable suspicion of illegal alienage, as opposed to in the past they needed probable cause that you had committed a crime. And so what we see down here is we see a reversal or an acceptance in which you have peace officers taking on immigration authority without any Congress or anybody saying, yeah, you can have that authority, or giving them that authority, and they're just taking it on, and they're now stopping people based on what Border Patrol is allowed to do, which is reasonable suspicion. So I have videos of them stopping people simply because of the color of their skin, which is legal according to the Supreme Court as long as you're stopping them for immigration purposes. Although I think that's debatable nowadays, because nowadays we have people of all skin colors crossing the southern border versus when I was an agent. I think that's a good argument to bring back up. And so we see this now. Just this last week, I noticed Border Patrol agents riding along with Montana state troopers, Border Patrol agents riding along with Maine state troopers. They are not asking immigration questions. They are learning how to stop people based on probable cause for traffic violations, which Border Patrol does not have the right to do. They do not have the legal authority to do. And at the same time, the state troopers in these states that are far away from our southern border are now learning how to stop cars based on racial profiling and reasonable suspicion. Nobody's talking about it, but why are these two groups that have completely separate authorities, completely separate jurisdictions, now combining? And this is because the Border Patrol does not want to be on the border. They want the states to be doing that enforcement. That's what they've been pushing in Texas and in Arizona. And the Border Patrol intends to be a national police force. That's the future I see. And the continued lying about how overwhelmed they are when they are not. When I was an agent in the 90s, we were averaging 23, 24 apprehensions per agent per month. Today, they average 6, and they're whining and crying about everything. So I expect more of this whining and crying. I expect more of this anytime one migrant maybe commits a crime, they just blow it out of proportion. And that's what I expect. We should see the Border Patrol moving more towards the interior. This is why we see them doing things like the Mission Creek when they go to rescue people with hurricanes, or when they go to BLM protests. So we start seeing them creep out past their jurisdictions and their authorities in events where they look like the heroes, and that's to prepare Americans and residents in areas where they're not used to seeing La Pinche Migra. You're gonna start seeing these guys. That's what's going on.
And Luis, how might organized crime, or how are they already sort of using this to their advantage, or how are they interacting within this dynamic of increased policing?
I think there are, for the most part, two big trends happening right now at the border that are very overlooked. And one of them, it's the amount of Mexican federal agents now guarding borders, which is crazy. I mean, Mexico has historically been a transit country and a welcoming country for migrants. But if you talk to several of them riding the beast or traveling through Mexico, they literally tell you, I'd rather get across the scary Darien 5 times than face with Mexican law enforcement, because apparently that's the biggest threat right now in Mexico, which is the same Instituto Mexicano de Migración, Instituto Nacional de Migración, the Mexican National Immigration Institute. That's a huge trend that is being overlooked, that we're not seeing, we're not learning a lot, because this is a very opaque, it's not transparent institute in Mexico. We don't even know how much funding they have. We don't even know what are exactly their objectives, right? They always tell you right here at the border when you try to interview them or anything, they always tell you they can't stop migrants, right? That's not our job. Our job is to rescue migrants, to kindly ask them to not get across because it's dangerous for them, and to rescue them from the hands of smugglers. When what we've seen here at the border is absolutely the opposite. They are arresting migrants. They are threatening them. They have even shot fires of shots at them, which is crazy, like live bullets and everything. So that will be one of the main trends. I think it's going to get worse because I think this Guardia Nacional, the Mexican National Guard, it's being more funded and more pushed to keep doing these arrests and these detentions and these abuses in Mexico. And I think it's by design to make them find other routes, to make them get away from the border on the Mexican-U.S. border. So I think this is going to be seeing more of that. And also, they're intertwined with too much focused on drugs, but on migrants. This is the new merchandise, the new valuable merchandise for criminal organizations. So they have to work hand in hand with these Mexican officials at border cities like where I'm sitting right now.
And if Mexico just said, basta, we're not going to help anymore, you can try your prevention by deterrence, but we're not going to be a part of it, would there be any prevention by deterrence? How much is that system and that ideology reliant on the cooperation of Mexico and other countries further south? I don't know if anyone wants to speak on that first.
It's completely reliant on it. Go ahead, Todd. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Okay, it's completely reliant upon it. Back in the days when I was an agent, you could not return somebody who was not a Mexican to Mexico in what we called a voluntary return, or a VR. Then they would try again the next day. And so the only reason why these programs have worked during the Trump administration, the Biden administration, is because Mexico is getting paid to accept them. But currently, my understanding from my sources in Mexico City and all the way down to the southern tip of Mexico and everything is that Mexicans are getting really tired of this. And my understanding is Mexico City is just kind of an outdoor camp right now for a lot of migrants, and they are not allowed to leave. So essentially, we are just paying somebody else to do our dirty work. And if they violate people's rights, which we know they are, and CBP knows that they are, and Border Patrol knows they are, then we are paying for human rights violations without taking any of the risk ourselves, essentially, is what we're doing. So at some point, if Mexico decided to get brave about it, all they would have to do is say, we're not going to do this anymore, and the numbers would jump right back up. So, yeah.
I remember doing some reporting in southern Mexico in 2014. It was right when the what was it called? The Programa Frontera Sur, the southern border program started with Mexico, and I was in the town of Arriaga in Chiapas, and there was a big operation where they just cleared everyone out of Arriaga, and that was where people would go up about 120 miles or so from Tapachula, the border, to get on the train. And I remember going to try to find where the people went and walking along the train tracks and getting to the kind of the monte, the area where kind of forested area out of the town, and just seeing like people in finding people, but in small groups. And I remember my first thought, just seeing small groups just waiting for the train, that was like Arizona, like what I've seen in Arizona, little camps of people in the desert of Arizona. But this is Arriaga in southern Mexico. And it just connected like the idea of deterrence, right? The prevention through deterrence strategy, where you force people out of the main routes and put them into more vulnerable positions and vulnerable areas, and how that part of the U.S. externalization of its border is the export of that strategy and contextually, of course, but implementing it in other places. And you could see that in southern Mexico quite clearly.
Hold on, I'm muted. I wanted to pivot a little bit to talking about surveillance and the new surveillance technologies that we're kind of starting to see right now. And, it's expected that these will grow more and more. Some of these technologies, the infrastructure for them is being built in factories in Mexico, but most of the companies making them are abroad. So what are some sort of ways that these surveillance technologies are affecting people living at the border, like in the vicinity of the border, and how is that going to continue and deepen and sort of grow in size and complexity? What is that going to look like?
Todd, I think you have the best expertise on this.
I'll say a couple. I mean, it's huge. The whole idea of the surveillance technology. It's definitely one of the biggest growth areas, I would say, of the enforcement apparatus. Just to think, there's a myriad of effects. I was just at a tower yesterday. It's there's about 50 what are called integrated fixed towers from Elbit Systems, an Israeli company, that have been built in southern Arizona. And not the one I was at, but I've been at others where they put the towers on hilltops, right? And on top of the hilltops, they're called integrated fixed towers because they're integrated one with the other. They're not working solo, right? They work together, and their feeds go into the command and control centers, Border Patrol command and control centers. But often from the tops of the hills, you can look right into communities, right? Like Arivaca is a town in Arizona where I just remember looking down into Arivaca going, if I can see down there, well, the cameras of these towers can see down there. And Arivacans very much say that. I've seen on the Tonahatam Nation, which is the native reservation that's in southern Arizona that has a border with Mexico. And just like these towers that look down into people's communities. So you have this surveillance, of the border itself. And then there's this idea and the capability, of course, and I would say that's probably being done, given places that are targeted, like the people in the Tonahatam Nation, of the surveillance into, of people living on the U.S. side of the border. And yeah, so it's just the technologies are that's a huge part of it. I'll stop with one other thing. Like, one of the newest things that I keep thinking back to when I think of border technology is the robotic dogs, and I think people have seen, heard, police units, police agencies are using them. There's at least 2 that Customs and Border Protection has. I wonder, what that means, right? Is there a sort of automation of the border patrol? I don't know. Like, what is there? Yeah, what is the purpose behind these UGV? They call them unmanned ground vehicles, but I can see like the drone technology, including these UGVs, that sort of roboticization. I don't even know if that's a word, of the border. That seems to be a huge trend as well, along with biometrics and a number of other things.
I will say, from the Border Patrol's point of view, from the agency point of view, the benefit of having these interconnected towers, the AIs, agents now don't have to leapfrog each other and track behind the migrants. One of the problems that the agency had when they brought out the deterrence policies in the mid-90s, which I was a part of, is that they lost a lot of us. We were killing ourselves, and I'm a victim of that too, but I survived. And we have the largest amount of suicides because we're oppressors. And so, just like what they did in Germany when they found that their soldiers were suffering from the brutality of the laws that they were enforcing, they try and move the oppressors away from that direct contact. And so what you see the Border Patrol in the United States doing is, to me, as a former agent and somebody who worked in that organization, is they're trying to remove us from the brutality of that. And so we're going to find less and less bodies, and they're not going to go after the bodies that are out there that the cameras see and so forth. And then the other thing I also want to say real quick is that if you go to Rio Grande Valley sector in Texas is one of the most heavily surveilled areas. And what they have done is, now that the border crossings are lower, they've moved Border Patrol agents into other details and further into the interior to do other things and do it undercover. And they've left the police officers, the state troopers, the sheriffs down there, and they're listening to the Border Patrol camera operators. And so they're now doing that work, even though they've never been technically trained in immigration, even though they technically do not have the authority to be doing that. And so when the numbers go down and those towers and everything are still there, they then are being used against local American citizens and legal residents. And that is the biggest problem that I see with all this surveillance.
I also think that all of this surveillance and all of these things happening at the border, it's doing something to border communities that we don't see, because it's just piling up. We don't see on the what the effects are on our daily lives until like years happen. When 9/11 happened, these very border changed forever, and we lost some civil liberties here at the border. We now must complain to all the questioning at the border, to all the searching, to turn in your phone and your private information because of national security issues. And I think that when immigration tries to mix in the same bag an immigration issue or migrants with cartels and criminal organizations and terrorists and all this stuff, it's meant to make us lose more of our civil rights and liberties. And we don't see that. I mean, we usually don't see that until it's very late, until like 10 years from now, the whole immigration beat and the whole immigration chat, it's all mixed up with the whole terrorism and the whole cartels and criminal organizations, when in fact it is absolutely two different issues, even though a lot of people don't want to accept that they're completely separate issues. The whole terrorism thing, the criminal organizations, and immigration, it seems more and more that we're hearing, mostly from U.S. sources, leaking documents, leaking photos, leaking videos, talking to the press, making these ride-alongs along the border, and making it seem that it's one same thing. It's usually migrants, cartel, terrorists. So, but basically what they're saying is like migrant terrorists, right? And I think that's really dangerous for us people living at the border because we're still losing. I get across the border probably 2 or 3 times every week. So I'm facing all the time. I'm facing, they searching my car, they're searching my phone, my computer, this and that, asking questions, where are you going? And you live in this constant state of, I don't want to say fear, but constant state of like harassment, where you have to have like a full story of what were you doing in Mexico, when it's like, dude, what if I would just went to get photos, or went to visit my grandma or whatever, but now I have to tell everything what I did every hour, this and that, so I don't lose my civil liberties or get arrested or put in secondary and waste my time, and all this stuff. And I think that's 100% a consequence, and we're probably gonna be see more of these when you have now drones watching over the border. In El Paso, you see these houses really close to the border being constantly watched over with drones. People are closing their windows at night because they're like, well, there is a drone. I don't know what's the capability of that drone flying near my backyard to watch inside my house or some stuff like that. So, it's all these little stuff that we're losing day to day, and they pile. And 10 years from now, we're going to be sorry for what we let go of our civil liberties and our civil rights.
Do you think that we'll ever get to a place with surveillance where organized crime won't be able to subvert it in order to continue having a boyero industry? Or do you think that mostly it will be boyeros like working with the Border Patrol to, like, you don't look at this section tonight and I'll, pay you however much type of situation? Or do you think that like there's no type of surveillance that's strong enough to sort of like keep that industry from being in place?
Yeah, I don't think, honestly, I don't think there's going to be like, we can have the biggest surveillance in the world. You can, put chips into every one of us, and people are still going to try to make it, and will still succeed at making it across the border. This borderland is imaginary, to be honest. I mean, it's just made up. It's the same land, it's the same territory, the same people. It's really impossible. I mean, to actually stop and put like imaginary borders and imaginary separate countries and separate this and that. The border is it's a country in itself, and it's a same like region, so people will go back and forth. I mean, it's very tough to say like, well, this surveillance system, well, you're gonna watch a lot of people probably crossing, but you're not gonna able to stop it. You're gonna just like watch them. Probably when it comes to drugs and criminal organizations getting stuff across, they don't use the same routes. I mean, this is 99% happening at the ports of entry with cars, with cargo, which has nothing to do with watching over the certain areas and installing border walls and intelligent borders and whatever. So I think it's going to be, it requires much more than that to stop, the flux of merchandise, but and people across the border.
And another thing I had to mention about the surveillance is that the industry part of it, do they ever want it to completely work, right? Doesn't it necessarily have to have constant challenges to justify getting innovations and more contracts and that sort of thing? So,
if you look back in the Obama years, one of the things that the reasons why the numbers are down right now is that Biden started back up with the funding of the Mexican programs that was started under the Obama administration, and Trump stopped paying the bills. And that's why you saw all these caravans. And Trump did that because he wanted the danger of these caravans or the look of this. It was all about look and perception. And the whole time telling people, we don't know who's in these caravans. They know. They've known the whole time. And so this is all, it's gotten to the point of where it's so about politics that it is actually hurting it could actually hurt our national security. And I always say, like, a robust asylum system is needed for actual national security. There are bad things coming in between the ports of entry, but the majority of people who are coming here legitimately because they're seeking help or they want to work or whatever the case is, you have to give them a legal avenue to do that. And by not giving them that legal avenue, you're just going to cause more and more people to cross illegally. And everybody knows this in CBP. Everybody knows this in Border Patrol. And, you know, we just keep on with the same plan. If deterrence policies worked, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this right now. We've had 30 years of it. And all it's done is killed tens of thousands of migrants, including children and asylum seekers. And it's killed a lot of Border Patrol agents as well. And a lot of innocent Americans who get caught up in our ridiculous pursuits to check somebody's papers and stuff. So if we want to keep up with where we're at, you know, just keep on. But it's not working, and it has not worked, and it's not going to work.
Yeah, Luis was telling me about car chases and how American citizens and tons of other people, whatever their status, have been killed in car chases as Border Patrol and other law enforcement attempt to pull someone over suspecting that they don't have adequate papers.
And a lot of times the agency doesn't pay for that. The agency doesn't pay for the death of your loved one. They don't pay for when they lose their legs and can't work anymore. It's, you know, because we have qualified immunity and we're not going to pay for any of that. And so we're just training down here on the southern border, at least, and it appears that we're starting to do it in other states. We're training cops with how we do things down here on the border. Let me just put it like that. And we're trained as agents to make them crash and hide how we make them crash and lie about it with our cover-up teams. So that's what's coming to the rest of America.
And I wanted to shift a little bit to climate because it's already affecting so much of what we see and is going to more and more. The migrants I'm meeting right now, a lot of them, you can sort of trace their stories back to some sort of climate disaster or climate change in general, even if they don't realize that themselves. Oh, you know, this farm somewhere was, you know, not having the output necessary. So the organized crime group that was extorting the farm now needs another place to extort from. They extort someone who then needs to travel to get away from that extortion type of thing. Climate is causing so many people to be in this situation where they need to travel. And so when we look at, you know, several 100 million to 1 billion people displaced by 2050, what is that going to look like at the southern border? What is that going to cause, and where are all of these people going to end up? This is a, you know, big open-ended question, but I thought you might have some thoughts.
Well, you can look at some of the assessments that have come from, like, the U.S. military. Like, there was a big report in 2003, and I'm picking one of many, but the 2003 was about the worst case climate scenario. And the authors of that report said they identified the United States and Australia as countries that would have to create defensive fortresses, because there will be so many people displaced. And then they say, and I'm paraphrasing, but I think I almost have it correct, to stop unwanted migrants, quote unquote, from Latin America and the Caribbean. And they say the Caribbean is going to be an especially severe problem. They don't say why. I imagine it's sea level rise and storm surges, hurricanes, that sort of thing. And that sort of assessment, right, where of building up more borders and building up more border walls, that's translated into many different assessments that I've seen. I've gone through a lot of them through the archives. And then it translates into this Customs and Border Protection adaptation plans that they have around climate, where the first one that came out in 2013 articulated that they're, you know, looked at some of the situations in Central America, understood the dry corridor, right? The dry corridor and the droughts and the unreliability of rain, and then said it could cause, quote unquote, mass migrations. And those mass migrations, we'll have to prepare, they say we have to prepare our borders for these mass migrations. So does that mean the defensive fortresses? Does that mean that through that lens of Pentagon or CBP or DHS, Department of Homeland Security, they're seeing this sort of climate reality that you put out in 2050, those numbers, as another reason not to look at how we rearrange the world in a different way, but as a way to border the world even more. From what I've read, that's what I've seen. It's going to justify further border fortification globally.
Okay, I have one more question, and then we need to go on to our Q&A. But it's, can a border be humane?
Yes, it can be humane to a certain extent. There's always going to be people, even when we widen the avenues with which people can come in so that we can expect them and know who's coming to our borders. And even if we create a system, which is the opposite of what we have now, where we're penalizing people for every little misstep, we won't allow them to work and this and that. Even if we had a system that was robust and allowed people in and brought them into our communities, there's always going to be people who, for whatever reason, need to cross the border illegally and stuff. There's always going to be a certain amount of that. But I think when your policies are that we don't want to let this many of this type of people in from this country, because let's be honest, when we do Ukrainians, we can process 700 a day at half a port of one port of entry, half of it. But when we do people from other countries and other colors of skin, then we're all overwhelmed and we can't do it. But there will always be some brutality and cruelty on our southern border. But we can limit that drastically by increasing and just changing the system. This brutality and the cruelty has not gotten us anywhere. Nowhere. It hurts everybody. It hurts the migrants. It hurts the agents down on the field. It hurts us as a society and everywhere. And when you take the three cornerstones of the immigration systems, ICE, Border Patrol, and CBP, you find that they meet all of the 5 elements of what the UN and the United States considers a genocide crime, except for the fact that it's not one race or one religion or one. And so that's the only thing. And so people feel better about that. But let's stop and think, okay, so are we okay with that? I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with that, even as a former agent. And I think that we need to start talking about this as you all have failed. Border Patrol has told us over and over again that this is the way we needed to go, and we did it, and it's a failure, and it's time to think about the border in a different way.
Anyone think a border can never be humane?
No, I mean, I honestly think that what Jen said really sums it up. I mean, there are ways to do like a humane border. Without all what Jen said, I think it's I agree that there are ways to do it. We definitely need a system. We probably need also more transparency into what these border agencies and law enforcement is doing, and I think that's probably a beginning of how to make a border more humane, because that's when you start transparenting the usual day-to-day of border agents, the border law enforcement. What are they doing? What are they doing it for? What are the real results? Not in just like numbers and put numbers on. We apprehended or rescued, 100 migrants a day, or whatever. But like, what does that even mean, and why is it important, and how exactly are you apprehending these people? Are you reading their rights under what law? All this transparency. I think it's a first start to start making this border more humane.
I don't know. Do you have the same thoughts or different, Todd?
Yeah, my thoughts tend to be, I definitely resonate with a lot of things that both Jen and Luis were saying around, like intrinsically, like when I think of borders, there's so many different types of borders, right? There's like the border like I'm looking at the garbage truck out my window right now. Well, there's a border where that garbage truck's going to go on a given Wednesday, right? And is opposed, and then I'll cross that borderline and nothing, right? There's nothing there to say I can't cross from that borderline into others. It's just a borderline that organizes the city, right? In a certain thing. The like there are definite ways to make it more like if you look at the U.S. Mexico border or a lot of international political borders, there are things that can be done to make it more humane. Like one thing is like the idea, I know it's a stigmatized concept, but like the idea of open borders, right? What it like opening borders. I mean, in the United States, you can just look at an open border system and just look at the states. You can I can cross most states without nobody's. I go from Arizona to New Mexico. I go from New Mexico to Texas. I go from New York to Pennsylvania. And there's not an enforcement apparatus there. I remember during the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, Rhode Island said it was going to discriminate or look for New York State license plates in March in 2020. And what was the name of the governor? Andrew Cuomo of New York at the time. Go and look and see what he said when Rhode Island said, we're going to put National Guard on the border. And if there's a New York State license plate that comes across, we're going to go after them and stop. And then Andrew Cuomo said, what? Like, what are you doing? We're going to sue you. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And to me, that was like, oh, this is what international borders, or when we go to the U.S. Mexico border, that's what's being done. People are discriminated against because in this case, it's a license plate. But when that sort of essence of this discrimination suddenly goes into a border that's just essentially open and then it's all of a sudden there or even proposed. It's interesting to see just the kind of reactions to that as if it's not a very natural thing, right? To do that. And then the one last thing, I mean, nation states, I mean, this is a much more loftier place. And I don't know if we have the space to go into this, but given like all this stuff, like given the climate stuff you're bringing up, given the fact that there's so much displacement that's anticipated for this century, that there has to be another way to think about how we organize the world, how we are organizing as a planet. I mean, thinking of organizing as a country versus I think we're at this point where that sort of consciousness has to shift from I'm of a certain country to I'm of this planet. And when you shift it to there, then the ideas of how we organize and the idea of how we have these international boundaries that are so discriminatory and just literally brutalize people, we might start to think of different ways of going about things. And I personally think we would. And I think that the kind of situation we're in is sort of forcing that issue for us to really contemplate maybe how we might do things in a different way in the future.
I think that's a great place to end. So let's go into our Q&A. So this is from Follow the John on YouTube. He says, how is the Border Patrol able to use unmarked white pickups with state license plates that CIT normally use? I think, Jen, you might,
He's talking about the illegal critical incident teams that have been now wrapped into CBP's Office of Professional Management and legitimized. I mean, John, the thing, there's no accountability in the Border Patrol, and the head of CBP's OPR is a former Border Patrol agent. The majority of the agents in the oversight agencies like OPR are ex-Border Patrol agents for a reason. Back in the day before OPR, before 9/11, when we were under DOJ, we would take our bleed green agents, our old bleed green agents that couldn't work in the field anymore, and we would send them to the DOJ and make them investigators of us. This has been going on for decades upon decades upon decades. And I mean, even under the Biden administration, when I outed the critical incident teams, they didn't care. They just swept them under the rug. So a question is to why they're able to drive unmarked cars and do whatever. Well, they're now a security agency thanks to Trump. They can pretty much do anything they want, and there's not a whole lot the press can do to hold them accountable, and there's not a whole lot that the government's going to do to hold them accountable. So that's why they can just pretty much do whatever they want.
This one is for Luis from Jared Olson on YouTube. He says, I remember Luis doing a report on the Mexican INM and Guardia Nacional managing a new cartel, in essence, to control and profit off of migrants. Can you describe the wider significance of that story?
Sure. Yes, I recently did a story about how the Mexican Institute of Immigration was basically becoming a new cartel. What I meant for this is that when we think about cartels extorting migrants, kidnapping them, and all this stuff, this is of course happening, but it is happening at a wider level by the INM itself. They are the ones who are controlling the migrant routes, controlling the permits, selling out permits, kidnapping people, making these bottlenecks in Tapachula and places in southern Mexico, and grabbing them at every single step of the way. So I think that's the significance of this story. Is to say sometimes we're looking into the a very like small scope of a bigger problem, right? We're focusing on small money by cartel, which by no means I'm saying they're doing something good. I mean, they are ruthless, they are violent, and they are criminals. But these other guys with a badge and a uniform are at a position where they are definitely more dangerous for migrants than the cartels. And these, I started reporting on this after several testimony from migrants calling on INM officials, even before the fire that killed like 40 of them in Ciudad Juarez at this one of these detention centers. And again, detention centers, quote unquote, because what it was an extortion center. It was a center where they were being kept because they didn't pay money to these corrupted officials, and that's basically why they died. So this is the most cruel part of the whole immigration thing happening right now in Mexico, that the same authority allegedly responsible for the benefit of these migrants are now basically acting as a criminal organization, kidnapping them, extorting them, and basically killing them and putting them in more danger. I can't imagine being a single dad or being a family, with your kids and everything, and then trying to ask for help to one of these agents and then ending up kidnapped by them and extorted by them. It completely breaks your mind, breaks your heart, and puts you in a very, very vulnerable position.
Yeah, Luis and I have done some tandem reporting in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, driving around, and every single migrant you meet there has been extorted by the Mexican immigration officials. Every single one at this point. It's you have to pass through it in order to get to the point where you're crossing the border.
I encounter the same all across the border. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is also, last question. This is also for you, Jen. It's from Ellen Starbird on Facebook. The U.S. offers few no protections for labor among undocumented people. 50% of our undocumented population is Mexican. Mexican asylum seekers are ruled ineligible at adjudication 80 to 90% of the time. Why are we rewarding employers for luring people into low-wage jobs? And I think a lot of people could speak on this as well.
Because those employers pay politicians, and they donate to politicians, and they donate to law enforcement agencies. And we don't hold rich people, people of position, accountable. So we're going to blame the migrants, and we're just going to take it out on the migrants. There's no employer sanctions. There never really has been. Like once a year, ICE will go, a couple times a year, maybe they'll make some big hurrah and swing out of their helicopters. But even then, they won't hold the employers accountable, because the employers will use an agency to hire them. And then technically, legally, they'll say, well, we don't know who they're hiring. This company's supposed to check all of this. And so there's all these legal avenues that allow them out. And the reason why is because the owners of the companies, like the meat packing plants and all these other places, have really good ties to politicians and to law enforcement officers. It's just as simple as that. Anybody else? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm currently doing another project that has to do with migrant workers with visas, who come on, temporary seasonal agricultural visas, and they are required by law to make a certain wage. And, their housing, though often unsanitary and inhumane, is required by law to be provided by their employers. And there are all these trámites that need to be resolved. And oftentimes these employers would much rather hire undocumented people who will take what they can get. So it's very much, there are a lot of powerful large companies that really rely on the work of people with very few rights who they can pay very little. And so it's kind of in the interests of those corporate entities to keep these people from gaining legal status. And there's definitely lobbying to that effect.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, okay. This is from Michael Brackney on YouTube. What books or articles on open borders or on organizing the planet in a better way would you recommend?
Todd's books.
Yeah, I was gonna plug Todd's books.
Not my book.
Empire of Borders. Everyone go buy that book. If you want to hear more about Todd's thoughts on the nation state and the border in a more theoretical way, all of Todd's books.
John Washington, I believe.
Case for Open Borders by John Washington.
That just came out. That just came out this year.
Mm-hmm.
There's others too. There's one called Open Borders, edited by Rhys Jones, who's a geographer from the University of Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one. It brings in all these different thinkers and with essays about either open borders or no borders. So it's both or different ways of thinking about organizing the world versus just more arguments for opening borders up.
Yeah, comment at Truth Dig if you'd like me to add a reading list to my dig on their site, because I hadn't thought of that before, but it might be a good idea. Okay, and then perhaps we can end with just sort of a round robin of what will the border look like in 10 years? What are the different scenarios? And where will the hotspots be?
Todd? Oh, may Todd go first.
Me first again. No, it's fine. 10. Whoa. That just says it. My computer falling over. Well, it can go so many different ways. The future is an X factor. So always have to say that. The trends, of course, going back to the first answer, the first question, right? That trend of budgets just going up and up and up. Every year, the budget for CBP and ICE, it goes up. It's up again this year. It's $30 billion. It was up from 29 the year before, and it went up from 26 the year before, from 25. It just keeps going up and up. The trend is that the budgets go up and up, and I'd love to see that trend shift at one point. But it seems like in 10 years, if to give an educated and very realistic guess, that it will continue to go up. The tendency towards technology seems to be probably a good thing to look at. Biometrics, the biometrics tech aspects of it, the drone, both on the ground drones and flying drones, probably I would guess those sorts of elements, both on the U.S. border and borders around the world. The global market, there's all kinds of projections for the Homeland Security and Border Security market that's put out by these companies. And they show that the global Homeland Security market, which encompasses biometrics, drones, all these technologies, is going to go up to $1 trillion When I first started doing this work, it was about $300 or $200 billion when I was writing my first book. So it's anticipated to go up to $1 trillion in the 2030s. That tells me that imagined by analysts is a world of all these kinds of technological surveillance in all the different type ways that it can meet, and things that we might only read in science fiction novels right now, that are just in some ways like locust drones, or drones the size of flies. I know that engineers are developing those sorts of things. And then another thing from the U.S. point of view, I think the externalization of the border is such a big part of the trend. This what they call pushing out the borders into other places, including all the, as we've talked about here, the cooperation with Mexico, but it goes beyond into Central American countries, South American countries. You look at CBP attachés in places all around the world, Nairobi, in Manila, and you look in places where you don't think there will be CBP, and there they are, and there's at least 100 different countries where CBP has worked in some sort of capacity in helping countries build up their borders. I see that as just by I don't know if just looking at what officials say, reading, going to the conferences, hearing how they talk about that sort of pushing out of the border as an important part of U.S. border strategy. It seems like that's just going to keep being a big deal.
Yeah, I agree on top that the future is basically unknown. But if we go and see the past 10 years and kind of like try to replicate what's happening, it's important to know that the border and the migrants right now, the whole migrant industry and all this stuff has become a business, a major business for Mexican criminal organizations, for Mexican government, for politics, for U.S. politics, for politicians. It is right now a currency of politicians saying like how to fix the border, and it has become not an issue of humanitarian help to other countries, but how are we gonna be the strongest people at the border? And all of these industries that was talking about, about the new technologies, the AI, and all these new industries are gonna pop in. I'm pretty sure. I've been living my whole life here at this border city in Ciudad Juarez for the past 37, almost 38 years. And I almost forget how this border looked back then. It was absolutely different. It was right now it looks like a militarized zone, with a bunch of U.S. National Guard, Mexican National Guard, barbed wire, fences, helicopters. And I've become used to this new reality at the border. So I'm not hopeful on how this going to look in 10 years. I think it's probably going to look like a more militarized zone. It's going to be, like the whole riverbank, which used to be even recreational for border people, it's absolutely out of reach right now for regular people without facing either Mexican or U.S. authorities or cartels asking you, what are you doing there? Like, this place doesn't belong to you, even though it's a free space that should belong to us on both sides of the border to meet, to enjoy, to sit at the river, River is also dry. Water is becoming more scarce. So this zone has changed so much in the past 10 years that I'm really not hopeful for how is it going to look. It's going to be dry river. It's going to be a war zone. It's going to be more militarized, more watched over. You're going to have all these movement sensors and drones above and this and that, AI agents. That this part of the land that we should share, it's not going to belong to us, the day-to-day citizens. It's going to belong to everyone else. Washington politicians, Mexico City politicians, all these people are going to be the only ones accessing this part of our town. And I see it happening right now. The region of Anapra, which is one of the sketchiest neighborhoods in Ciudad Juarez, right next to Sunland Park, New Mexico, that used to be usually a place to smuggle people, right, where they go back and forth and get across, whatever. But it was accessible. And right now it's not accessible because it's, first of all, they're calling it private land right now. Apparently it's someone owns that part of the land on the U.S. side of the border. Border Patrol usually won't go there because of security reasons, so they won't take you there. They will discourage you from reaching out to that part of the border wall. And if you go on the Mexican side, you will face a Mexican National Guard checkpoint also discouraging you from reaching that part of the border. And if you go beyond them, you will face cartel members saying like, hey, this is out of reach for you, just get away, get lost. So it seems that the border, it's not belonging to us anymore. And if what Todd was saying, like this is expanding further inside both countries, that these whole border cities are going to be, owned by everyone else but us local citizens. We're going to have to move to other places to feel that we belong to that city and to call these parks and recreational areas and open areas our own, and yeah, I'm not hopeful.
Another thing that I think may grow is like things like the CBP1 app, where it's some effort towards quote unquote streamlining to help migrants get through the process or whatever, but it actually is a tool for more surveillance. And the migrants are having to learn how to use VPNs and ways to get around their location being tracked by the U.S. government. So I think we may see more and more things like that, where it's like an innovative new initiative that actually, though it may quote unquote streamline things, is actually creating more surveillance or more tracking, or has like some other nefarious side to it. Okay. Thank you all for being here. Order Todd's books, order Jen's book Against the Wall, read Luis's Substack, read my dig at Truth Dig. So thank you to you panelists. Thank you to everyone watching. Thank you to Zwade, our publisher, and to Truth Dig in general and the whole team.
And thank you for joining us, Lillian, Luis, Jen, Todd, really for your wide-reaching discussion, which was just so stimulating and complex. And really, we have to say we appreciate, not only your reporting and your analysis, also you're really striving to find humane solutions to this terrible situation. So thank you all for your work, really important work. And we also want to thank our audience for your participation, and to let you know there's going to be a transcript available on Truth Dig of this event. Also, you can read Lillian's dig on the topic on Truth Dig, and along with the rest of our in-depth reporting. We look forward to seeing you all soon.